quickly on Facebook. Alaba Suleiman, thank you very much for those fine things you said. In the case of Chief Nnamdi Azikiwe, who was president of Nigeria at the time, he was also largely spared for the direct violence of the coup. At the time, I'm trying to read. Okay, at the time, he was not actively involved in the day-to-day political affairs and was somewhat insulated from the immediate impacts of the coup. Moreover, the coup was more focused on political and military leaders, especially in the northern region, so Azikiwe managed to avoid being a direct target. It is definitely fascinating how regional dynamics influence who was affected and who wasn't. If you have more questions, I'm happy to dive deeper. No, I think you'll raise more questions from what you said that I'm willing to ask. The truth of the matter is that Azikiwe did not, when you use the word like he managed to insulate himself from Guinea, he didn't manage to insulate anything. He was part of the whole stuff. Let's talk true. There's something that I didn't read last week from the special branch report that explicitly mentioned the name of the premier of the Eastern region as complicit in the coup of 1966. I just decided not to get into all of that. I said last week without mentioning any name. Well, I'm not even mentioning any name right now, but one of these days, maybe as we have this conversation, we might get there. When we get to the bit, we might. It's right there. And then the other civilians that were involved in the coup, they were not mentioned by name, but that premier was mentioned. That's Okpara. You know what? That's what I mentioned earlier. Let me read to you so that you can. So I'm not just going to solve I'll quickly find that page. Where was it? Let me send to you. It says here, the execution of the plan, that's of the coup, was to take place in 3 areas only. Right? The execution of the plan was to take place in 3 areas only, but they said it was supposed to take place in all the capitals and in Calabar. It says the execution of the plan was to take place in 3 areas only, i.e. Kaduna, Ibadan, and the Lagos area, although many of the participants believed the insurrection to be nationwide. It is a matter of established fact that no violent action took place in either Benin City or Enugu. It has been suggested that these areas were spared because the plotters found it impossible to recruit reliable co-conspirators in these regions. None of the officers indicated under interrogation that any efforts to recruit collaborators in either Benin or Enugu were made. Indeed, listen to this, indeed, subsequent action of some of the leading officers indicated collaboration with the then Premier of Eastern Region. Azikiwe did not just happen to leave because he was not involved in all these fantastic examples and what's the word, excuses we make for certain people. They were in on it. That's from the special branch report of 1966. They told people that wrote, someone like this who wrote the book Why We Struck, Adewale Ademoyiga, was waxing lyrical about that they were going to do fantastic things all over Nigeria. They would be in Lagos and in Ibadan and in Kaduna and in Benin and in Enugu. That was what he wrote in the book. They're going to go to Calabar and release Awo, where you go and read the interrogation. The report from the interrogation says actually they planned for only 3 places. And he, Uri and Owefefo Agbon, actually, and I mentioned this last week, if you think about it, he was supposed to be the fall guy. He just didn't realize it. And hindsight is 2020. If you think about it, you have to agree with me, to be honest. What do I mean? Look at what do we call the coup today? Let's just do a little very quick interaction before we get into the topic of today. When we mention the coup in 2025, right? Whose name comes to mind? Forget the fact that you have learned stuff, you have read a lot of books, so you know it's not that. But generally speaking, in the public space, whose coup do we call it? If we have to attach anybody's name to the 1966 January coup, whose name do we attach? Nzogu. Thank you, Dr. Badru Nzogu. I see. We say Nzogu because Nzogu was the one who went on Kaduna radio. He used the media. Thank you, you're all correct. He used the media. So everybody says it was Nzogu coup. What was the job given to Adewale Ademoyiga in Lagos? Media. He was supposed to announce the coup. That was his job. The only good thing I see in that job is that he didn't have to kill anybody. But in reality, he was going to be the fall guy. till tomorrow, where most people still call the coup Nzogu coup, even though it was not the one who even planned it. It was one of the planners, yeah, but it came in much later. And it was the coordinator in the north, not the planner of the entire thing. By the way, I saw a video yesterday. I don't want to respond to it today. I saw it. But yeah, maybe on Wednesday. On Wobosi. He said it was the last of the. It was the only surviving. What's the English word? Now, it was the last of the coup planners or coup plotters, and that's a lie. I'm talking about a very old man, maybe in his 80s or 90s. And he said, oh, he was the last of the coup plotters. It's a lie. He's not. He wasn't. Yes, we just finished talking about one elder that lied last week. We're going to have a full session to respond to that one. Then I saw this one yesterday. He said that he's old, he's not afraid to die, so he has no reason to lie, and that he's the last of the remaining coup plotters. He definitely wasn't. How do I know that? This report says he was recruited on the 14th. The coup was on the 15th. And yes, he was one that killed SLA. Chiralo Akintola. He was in Abeokuta, moved to Ibadan, and killed SLA in Ibadan. He wasn't part of the planners. He was one of the executors of the coup. But again, just because somebody is old and they start saying things, everybody's like, oh, Tony, listen to elders, but also fact check. Not because they're necessarily lying. I mean, generally speaking, if it's the East, they are actually necessarily lying. Let's not lie. If it's from the East, they're intentionally lying. But generally speaking, if an elder is speaking, I will listen. I remember talking to my mentor the other day and he was telling me something. I was like, he told me something, I can't say it in public. And that thing is true. But I can't say because I was asking, I have to be able to refer to something. So like I was asking for like a reference. And what he's saying is true. Because he was quoting people and quoting this and this and this, just like you would do if you're writing a thesis. He's correct. But we're like, okay, so he not told me that what he would need to do to be able to get us that peer-reviewed stuff that we would need to be able to, make those statements boldly. That's somebody who is telling the truth, though. Let alone the person who is lying. Someone says Nwobos is still alive. I don't know if he's still alive, but the video I saw, it was very old, and he said, that statement just made me feel like, what are you talking about? You're not one of the planners. You were brought in later. As a matter of fact, Bule got involved before him. But someone will tell you that, are you there? Were you there? Just because he was alive at the time does not mean he's telling the truth. And a very good example is Chinua Achebe. Read his last book. You will now wonder in your mind, like, how can a person write this as their final gift to the world and still feel it through propaganda? So just because a person was there does not mean they're telling the truth. They could be old and still be lying. And to be honest, trying to find if there's any old person from that part of the country that's actually talked about the war and has said the truth. Maybe the Baba that I met, Shah, because I was telling me his own private experience. But on a broad level, now social handicap that they carry themselves. So I just wanted to read that about what's his name? The premier of the Eastern region. In case you were not here, I'm going to read it again. Ade says Nwobosi was part of the guys. No, it was the one that led them. It was the one who actually did the killing. It was the one that Akintola shot at. You'll find it in the book by John de St. John. When he was coming up, Akintola got his gun and started shooting. I think the gun even hit him. Right? And then it was the one that, eventually killed Akintola because Akintola ran out of bullets, got out of, the space, and then the guy just shot him, killed him. He died less than 5 years ago. Oh, really? I saw that video. One of these we'll listen to it. Excuse me. This challenge really is just the age thing. Because it has this... It makes you want to believe them. Because they were involved. But like I said, Why We Struck was written by a man that was involved. And even he took responsibility for what was not even his responsibility. What was the word? He took responsibility for what he wasn't responsible for. But I'd rather take that one, than the person who doesn't even take responsibility for anything. At the end of the day, they're going to blame Nigeria and blame everybody else but themselves. But this one even blames himself for something that he did not even really do. If you consider how things were done, it wasn't really his fault. It is well. In case you came in late, I'm going to read that part again. The execution of the plan was to take place in 3 areas only. It was supposed to be 6, according to Adewale Ademoyiga. Excuse me. According to Adewale Ademoyiga, it was supposed to be 6 places: Lagos, Kaduna, Benin, Ibadan, Enugu, and where? Calabar. But according to this report, the execution of the plan was to take place in 3 areas only, i.e. Kaduna, Ibadan, and the Lagos area. Although many of the participants believed the insurrection to be nationwide, many of the participants, including the author of Why We Struck, believed it was supposed to be nationwide or countrywide. I prefer saying countrywide, entire country, Nigeria. It is a matter of established fact that no violent action took place in either Benin City or Enugu. It has been suggested that these areas were spared because the plotters found it impossible to recruit reliable co-conspirators in this region. So the reason they didn't do anything there was because they didn't have collaborators or co-conspirators in those places. That's why they didn't do anything. However, none of the officers has indicated under interrogation that any efforts to recruit collaborators in either Benin or Enugu were made. In other words, they didn't even recruit anybody in that area. Indeed, subsequent action of some of the leading officers indicated collaboration with the then Premier of Eastern Region. E.g., why was it that when Ifajuna and Okafor left Lagos, why was it that of all the places on earth they could go to, they went to Enugu? And they were guests of the Premier. Why was it that even Adewale Ademoyiga, this man, and Christian Ofuro, when they left Lagos and via Ijebu-Ode, why was that the only place they went to was Enugu? Why? If I did not run to Enugu before he ran away to Ghana, and then was it repatriated? Why did they go to meet the Premier of the Eastern Region? Your answers are as good as mine. We'll come back to all these things later, but let's get to today's topic: how Nigeria's first republic ended, part 5.